The Grand Trout. Excerpt from Jerome K. Jerome's book, Three Men in a Boat. Jerome goes on a boating trip on the River Thames with his two friends, George and Harris, and his dog, Montmorency. In this excerpt, they stop at the famous fishing town called Streatley. George and I don't know what had become of Harris. George and I, therefore, and the dog left to ourselves for a walk to Willingford on the second evening, and coming home we called in at a little riverside inn for a rest and other things. We went into the parlour and sat down. There was an old fellow there holding a long clay pipe, and we naturally began chatting. He told us that it had been a fine day today, and we told him that it had been a fine day yesterday, and we all told each other that we thought it would be a fine day tomorrow. And George said that the crops seemed to be coming up nicely. Then a pause ensued in the conversation, during which our eyes wandered around the room. They finally rested upon a dusty old glass case, stood very high up the chimney piece, containing a trout. "Ah," said the old gentleman.
"Fine fellow that, ain't he?"
"Quite uncommon,"
I murmured. George asked the old man how much he thought it weighed.
18 pounds 6 ounces,
said our friend.
"Yes,"
he continued.
"I caught him just below the bridge with a minnow. Don't see many fish that size about here now, I'm thinking. Good night, gentlemen, good night."
Out he went and left us alone. We could not take our eyes off the fish after that. We were still looking at it when the local courier came to the door of the room with a pot in his hand, and he also looked at the fish.
"Good-sized trout, that,"
said George, turning round to him. "Maybe he wasn't here, sir, when the fish was caught," we told him. "Oh," said the courier, "of course, how should you? It was nearly 5 years ago that I caught that trout."
"Oh, was it you who caught it then?"
said I. "Yes, sir," replied the genial fellow. "I caught him just below the lock, leastways. What was the lock then? One Friday afternoon. The remarkable thing about it is that I caught him with a fly. You see, he weighed 26 pounds. Good night, gentlemen, good night." 5 minutes afterward, a third man came in, described how he had caught it early one morning. Then he left. A stolid, solemn-looking, middle-aged individual came in, sat down over by the window. George turned to the newcomer and said,
"I beg your pardon. I hope you will forgive the liberty that we, perfect strangers in the neighborhood, are taking. But my friend here and myself would be so obliged if you would tell us how you caught the trout up there."
"Why, who told I caught the trout?" was the surprised query. We said that nobody had told us so, but somehow or other we felt instinctively that it was he who had done it. Then he went on and told us how it had taken him half an hour to land it. He said he had weighed it carefully when he reached home. It had turned the scale at 34 pounds. The landlord came in to us. We had told him the various histories we had heard about his trout, and he was immensely amused. "Well, that is good," said the honest old fellow, laughing heartily. Then he told us the real history of the fish. It seemed that he had caught it himself years ago when he was quite a lad. He said that bringing home that trout saved him from a whacking. Called out of this room at this point, George and I turned our gaze upon the fish. It really was the most astonishing trout. It excited George so much that he climbed up on the back of a chair to get a better view of it. Chair slipped and George clutched wildly at the trout case to save himself, and down it came with a crash.
"Haven't injured the fish, have you?"
I cried in alarm.
"Hope not,"
said George, rising cautiously and looking about. But he had. The trout lay shattered into 1,000 fragments. We thought it strange and unaccountable that a stuffed trout should break up into little pieces like that. The trout was plaster of Paris.